Good morning. Namaste. Group hug. Come join me on the sofa. As you know, the YouTube live sessions are about staying sane and staying positive. And today we mourn also and we join in Blackout Tuesday for George Floyd, who was unfortunately killed. And it's an industry recognition of his life. Today we have Steve Sokić. I hope I pronounced that properly, Steve. And he is Group Head of Private Wealth. He has an illustrious career in the sector. You can have a look at his life on LinkedIn. And always, it seems, in large numbers of staff. I saw you were previously at RBC and you've been in very high ranking careers. And I thought currently EQ has 2,500 staff, but maybe 3,000 staff. So maybe you want to say good morning to the viewers and give us a lowdown on your career.
Morning, Karen, and morning to everyone listening or watching in. So, yeah, briefly about IQ. So the brand is relatively new. It's only a year old, I think, or a little bit more than that. I mean, the legacy businesses that form what we are today go back decades. And I mean,
So
very briefly.
What were the legacy businesses? Because in my head, one of them was First Names.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm not
yeah.
sure.
So First Names was the bulk of the private client component of what we have today. They were focused mainly around the Crown dependencies in the UK. We also had SGG, which was predominantly in the sort of continental Europe, Benelux region, but they also had operations in Asia and elsewhere. And then on the fund administration side, on the alternative asset side, we had Agentius, which was in Luxembourg in the UK. Those three were the biggest, and then we had a number of sort of small to mid-sized businesses that form what we have today as well. So it's roughly, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, you can carry on, but I was just going to say, how does a boss like you deal with all of this with like day to day? I mean, not just COVID, but like what kind of team do you have circling you to deal with 3,000 staff a day?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Out of the 3,000 people, about a third is my sort of domain in the private wealth and family office space. So it makes it a little easier that way. And then we have a sort of matrix model where we have local management, of course, because it's a big world. We're in 23 countries. But then we cut the segment across all of our jurisdictions with a family wealth committee, and that's the committee I chair. I call it the FC simply because I like football. But so that's how we stay. That's how we stay connected. That's the short answer to your question, I think.
And so work from home, we've got to look at a very swanky office coming up on the screen, which looks like you're the chairman of a big ship like James Bond. It looks fabulous, and I can see lots of gorgeous stuff in your office there. So give us a thoughts on working from home and like how are you dealing with WFH? I mean, it's a bit of a shock to the system for all of us, isn't it? But I mean, as a boss, it's more interesting.
Well, especially in the private client space. I mean, we're used to face-to-face conversations with families, with their advisors, with our people around the world. So it's a psychological sort of shift. It really has been. In my career, I don't think I've been this long in one place at home. But things like this and this discussion over Zoom and other, you're getting used to it. As are interesting, a lot of our clients, including even the older ones, the older generation, which I thought this might be even a bigger struggle. But interestingly, even for them, it's I'd say more people have adjusted better than I thought we would. Doesn't mean we necessarily enjoy it. I think human nature is that we like to interact, but I think by and large, most people have made the best of it.
Yeah, and we're getting a sense, I think, or even myself, at first I was like, OMG, I do not want to do Zoom running a big event business. But now, like, people call me up and they say, oh, can I just ring you on a phone? I'm like, oh, can we just do Zoom? Because it's like so much fun and then we can see each other and, blah, blah, blah. So it is interesting, isn't it, the change. And as I was saying earlier, like Jane Keir at Kingsley Napley was saying that they think court hearings will now just go on to Zoom and people won't bother doing that visit to court. So it is causing a change, which maybe it was, bring that thing like too many air miles and stuff like that, kind of crashing down into this sort of green and environmental world.
It might, but I think the other part to this, we had, near 3,000 people within 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks, go from the office to home. And I can tell you that is a real test of your planning, of your business resumption planning, and these sort of things, which a lot of the regulators insist on, and you have to prove, etc. But this is real life stuff, and you in a sense plan as much as you can, but at the end of the day, until there's a real life scenario like this, you know how good your planning was, and thankfully for us, it went very well.
So how are you dealing with like people at home? I mean, I've Citywealth, there's a lot of economic empowerment of women, which just has been one of those things that we've championed over the years. But I've always thought WFH, work from home, was always going to be the great leveler in that whether you spoke about, equality of pay or whatever, when you're suddenly both at home with the kids all day long, both going to do homeschooling. I mean, it's like all talk about it becomes a reality, doesn't it? So we're finding a lot of problems with people in the industry dealing with homeschooling all day long, being quite exhausted, and the children refusing to do it, having to always be police of the teaching online. I mean, how does that manifest in terms of like being able to do 7 hours of work a day?
It's a really good question, and this has come up in a number of our team meetings and surveys that we've done with staff over the last few weeks. I mean, personally, my girls are university age; they're home now, so I don't necessarily have those types of challenges. But when I speak to a lot of our people, particularly as you mentioned, the female employees, it's a bit tricky. There's no secret sauce, but what I would say, if the employer, us in this case, and the employees have some flex, and some flexibility is required on both ends, BAU can continue. It's not perfect. It's not perfect by any means in these sort of disruptive times. So, for example, a number of people get up quite early, start their day, and then take a break for 2 or 3 hours in between, and then carry on thereafter. So as long as there's flex, and also with clients, of course, and making sure that the clients are serviced. So I think we've been able generally to strike that balance. And that's not, it's not just us as managers saying, okay, we can do these sorts of things. It's also our employees showing an immense amount of flexibility, I would say. And again, this is a circumstances we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one with the clients, because even doing this YouTube live sessions, Citywealth had made a big push into the USA. You realize actually the time difference immense, isn't it? And even with New York, so I'm getting what you're saying, but we've said to a few people, hey, we would love to have your thoughts, and we got Josh Rubenstein from Cass and Rich and Rosamund, and he said, I have to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, Karen, to meet your deadline, which I can do. We wanted to dedicate it to our friend Andrew Young, who unfortunately died, not of COVID, but another situation. And he said he wanted to play the piano because they'd always had a great life of, having fun, making some cocktails, drinking and singing. And he said, if I play the piano in my block in New York at 6 a.m. in the morning, I am going to get evicted. And I was like, actually, the Zoom world is interesting, but I do not think it works very well with international clients. And that's a problem I'm facing. They're like trying to connect with people in Cayman or Bermuda so you have a massive Asian business, don't you? And they have, I know that they're a bit earlier in the time cycle, but being switched on and everyone coming to a Zoom party where you have champagne and the scarf or whatever. I mean, it just doesn't look like reality in my head.
Well, first of all, I didn't think Josh slept, so him getting up too early in the morning, I think.
Yeah, he doesn't.
But I mean, you raise a good point. I mean, actually, you raise a very interesting point in this disruptive time is even the risk of burnout, because a lot of people, and we've warned our people about this as well, is you won't, because you're working from home, quite often there's a sense that you need to do even more. In many ways. So whilst, of course, we want our people to be productive and clients served, absolutely. We also don't want sort of to go over the edge as well. So we've also looked at that side. So for me, I mean, I live in a sort of central, if you will, time zone. here in the British Isles in Jersey. So for me, for the Asia, or me for America, it just means staying up a bit later or getting up a bit early in the morning. So for us, it's not too bad. Sort of on the time zone point.
So let's move on to some business slots now. So
Sure.
we have one, and I'm thinking about the economic environment. And one of the things that came out very quickly, which was not me because I'd already done my will and my succession plan, but it seemed that a lot of business people, which is me as well, are very slow to get those things sorted, aren't they? And they're too busy making money to actually go, oh, I should probably organise my life. But so succession has become a massive issue, it seems, getting wills sorted. And we spoke to Shillings and to Lansons, and they have a belief mindset that, there'll be a lot of litigation after this. People are worried about investment returns, or did they get the right advice? So just, is that what you're seeing in the economic environment, succession and litigation themes, or is it a completely different world?
Well, I think just on the topic of succession, I think it's events like this that is a wake-up call, right? And it's the preciousness of life, frankly, that people need to be reminded about, even the wealthy, of course. And so, yes, it is a theme. At least several times each week, I'm with clients like this, and it comes up every single time. Even where they've set up structures, they're thinking, did we do that right? Remind me how that works again with the children, or this generation, that generation. What if they marry somebody? Things like so. Absolutely, that comes up. Not only in setting something up, but also reviewing what they do have. Absolutely,
which is
true.
Do you think that's the most misunderstood thing about succession, that you can't just do it once? It needs a regular review. And I'm often really surprised it's not this annuity thing, which I think there is in trust, but a lot of the lawyers have not latched on to the idea. Wills need regular review, don't they? Each year, and another fee, or almost an annuity charge to go, does this still work? Are the pets all still alive that you're inheriting? Do we still own that farm? It's a sort of real check-in process, isn't it?
It does, and I think it also lends to a trend around more sophistication around these things, a better sense of governance that was previously perhaps for more institutional type firms or entities or companies that families are employing as well. And again, it's all part of that same realization or wake-up call that times like this often calls.
So what are you telling clients now? We move on to the advice slots. I mean, one of the things I mentioned to you beforehand, which you can discuss or not discuss, is that previously the big theme with big families is co-investing, which had kind of, maybe they felt self-satisfied that they had all their investments already sorted, and we were already sort of a couple of generations in that kind of thing in the Western world, aren't we? Where people are like, blah, 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 I get the model, macro, whatever. But they had started co-investing in private equity. But what you're seeing now is, although there's a lot of dry powder and still a lot of money to go and people can hold on to these investments, but obviously some industries have gone catastrophic, haven't they? Like aviation, hospitality. How is that manifesting? Is it having any impact on your life, IQ, with clients, or is it just something that's it's nothing to do with you?
Well, I think there's a few points that you've mentioned there. Co-investing, what's happened now during COVID, and I also tie into what I mentioned earlier around the sort of governance step up, more sophisticated, that a lot of the clients are wanting to be and trying to find out how. And I think that ties into family offices sort of quite nicely as well. But I just want to mention, I was reading yesterday, actually, the Camden Wealth Report, I think it was, last year, 2019. And they indicated that 55% of family offices had predicted a recession in this year, okay, in 2020. Now, obviously, that was before COVID. And interestingly, around half of them had actually started preparation for that, started realigning their investments, started increasing their cash reserves, changing their debt arrangements. Now, their prediction was true, but I don't think they obviously the basis of that prediction was COVID. So they were preparing ahead. Now, also the co-investments point is an interesting one. Again, it ties into family offices. there's a whole ecosystem now developing, right? And I think it's a really, really interesting thing. It's sort of replacing or building on what the private banks and investment banks used to dominate. I mean, there's still players in this space, of course.
Yeah.
But the family offices now are creating this new ecosystem around private assets, and that particularly alternative assets, like you said, private equity. But I'd throw real estate in there as well. Those are probably the two biggest. And now every year it seems that they're getting more and more influential. You know, you see their name popping up when you see private operating businesses being purchased or big commercial properties being purchased. More and more the family offices are behind that. And to your point, they're teaming up with other family offices to make those investments, either through a fund or in many cases directly. So in terms of trend during COVID, yes, there's a lot of dry powder. Absolutely agree. And in a way, in a sort of odd sort of way, they were almost prepared for it, given what I just mentioned, you know, with the survey, which supports that. So we are seeing deployment. We're starting to see deployment of that dry powder, it mainly into those asset classes, the alternative asset classes that I mentioned already, particularly private equity and real estate.
One of my friends is his family. He's one of the children of a very rich property family. But you're right, they were the same. They said there's going to be absolute catastrophe this year, and they were preparing for it. He's a big Bitcoin person, so that's our connection. But you're right, they were ready for that. But does that mean that they were ready? I think they were expecting a big property downturn. But does that? I mean, for instance, with Warren Buffett, there's big news now, isn't there, that he's pulling out of stuff, and other people are pulling out of him because he had massive investments in aviation. And the sense with one of the ladies we spoke to, who is a big investor in alternative investments, was that aviation will not recover really for many years after this. And that was actually a bad investment, which none of us saw coming. So, I mean, is there any sense that some people invested in stuff they just went down the wrong route, which none of us could really see?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and time will tell. But you mentioned Warren Buffett. He was also the one, I think, that said, if you add up all the profits of all airlines throughout history, it's actually still less than zero, which is an interesting.
Really?
I found that fascinating. But so I think the question is, what asset classes are interesting and where, right? Mm-hmm. And I think again, private equity and real estate are by far doesn't mean our clients aren't investing in more liquid public securities and that. Of course they are, and managing their liquidity requirements, etc. But in terms of the growth, investing for the long term, and this is the other thing around family offices, they have a much different time horizon, right? They're different than pensions.
The Chinese timeline, you know, like 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, they're not in a rush, and that gives them an advantage to get good deals as well. And even this week, I was busy with one acquisition from one of our family office clients and the family from the Middle East. And I said, why now? Why don't you wait a little longer and see if you can, I mean, I'm summarizing here, but see if you can get a better price, essentially. And we talked about it, and we said, you know, now's the time. Now, it's a bit of, a lot of the family offices, I would say, are trying to balance things out during this COVID crisis, because no one knows how it's going to end. Having said that, when you see a good deal, you know, you go for it.
Take it.
Because partly because of that time horizon.
I think that was, if you leave it too long, then everyone will jump on it because it gets so distressed, doesn't it? And actually, there is an opportunity now with a deal which is more friendly in a way. I something bizarre, which was about sort of electricity 100 years ago, and they said actually the people were fighting over who made the light bulb. It did work together in the end. Then a friendly, more successful deal, isn't it? So you get them when they're like thinking, a bit worried about the future, but not so bad that it's just a fire sale and everything's gone wrong and everyone left. And so I think that's probably a good sentiment, I would have to say. And you get people while they're still positive and still got good ideas about the business.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and and I think before this call, we were chatting a bit around, I bring up family offices again because a lot of the former investment bankers and private bankers went and set up these family offices. But at the beginning of our discussion, now we also talked about succession, right? And the importance of succession. And so I think the interesting dynamic we're seeing, and again, I had it this morning in a call with a client, is this convergence of those two worlds, that investment banking sort of investment world with that succession preservation world, pretty much in the ecosystem of what we call family offices. And when you put those two things together, it's an interesting mix when it comes to behavior around things like investments and timing and the like. And frankly, the deal I was referring to earlier this morning was an introduction. So a lot of these deals that they're looking at are introductions, co-investing. People, they know each other, and that's also what I mean by this ecosystem as well.
So tell us, you have a new family office launch, and from my perspective, as I was saying, I think that this is something that, well, it's a bit of a strange word, or phrase, family offices, isn't it? I mean, when you're in the industry, you understand there's been a seismic change about what it means. If you're outside the industry, people think family office is just rich people. I must pitch them and sell them a yacht. There's not really a move on in the external world to the internal world. But our internal world went from, which we've now renamed them private investment offices, who manage the money, and they don't want to do the rest of the life of the family's admin. But that does seem to have moved offshore, where there's a specialism, isn't it? A fiduciary, which is managing the family's wider life, whether that be, as I was saying, in the States, which is a bit more financial bookkeeping, or if it is managing horse ranches or art projects, art collections, museums, property, people all over the world. So there has been a massive push out offshore, hasn't there? And a few people have done this. So what is the reason that IQEQ have decided to do it?
Well, I think, the way I would look at it is a lot of the firms like us have our roots in trust, in fiduciary services. So acting in a client's best interest, it's part of your DNA, right? And I think that DNA lends very, very well in the family office space. Now, just to be clear, what we're doing in terms of the announcement yesterday is we've been in the family office space, as many of our competitors have, for a long time, decades. But what we've done, and some of our competitors have done, is to say, you know what, we do this in different parts of our business. And now a firm like ours, where we're one of the largest in the world right now in this space, says, you know what, we do a lot for family offices. Let's just put it together. And that's essentially what we've done. These services have been around for a while, and different family offices would use different elements of it. So what we've essentially done is bring it all together under a common sort of stewardship. And that's really the essence of it. Everything from managing, multi-asset classes, which for us is normal. As trustees, for example, it's a normal thing, and that's what family offices look into. The other thing I think is important, and it ties into COVID, some of the anxiety now, is around reporting. It's amazing how families can kind of get this peace of mind when they see things in a very easy, understandable, perhaps consolidated, visual sort of way. That stuff is really important. That's part of the announcement yesterday as well. That also a couple of our competitors have done, but we're certainly in that space as well. And it's also, I think, what drove this, coming back to alternative assets, right? Private equity and real estate. That's a huge asset class for us, as it is for family office. So there's just a natural synergy we've had for a while, and then we said, you know what? We just need to frame this better so our own people and the external market know it. And that's really what was that came from yesterday. And also, I just come back to what I said earlier around the ecosystem, around family offices. I'm a big sort of believer in that, and you'll probably see an article from me in the next week or two on this, is the development of that ecosystem and how it's going to evolve. Where do the family offices sit? What do they need to outsource? What bits do they still need the private banks and the investment banks? So this is a new world that's evolving. I mean, they've been around 100 years, but it's really the only, the last, 7 to 15 years, whatever it is, that they've really started to take more prominence. And it's going to be even more.
I mean, traditionally, and viewers may or may not know this, there's always a problem with single family offices, hasn't there? It's like multi-family offices really were what was turned into private investment offices, which were just actually families investing together, that kind of stuff. But then a lot of single family offices have popped up, haven't they? They've outside the industry, that looks like the way to go, doesn't it? You just get a little office you shout at, and they like admin staff who do your bidding, and they're yes men or women. But actually, they've never historically, this is the industry stereotype, been very well run, have they? There's always a feeling that actually, if the boss shouts, they just do whatever the boss says. And in fact, clipping on, which in my head, so tell me if I'm wrong, looks like you're clipping on that sort of expertise onto maybe an entrepreneur, woman or man's creativity. You're clipping on that kind of rigorous sort of way to move forward with the rest of the processes of their thought and business, isn't it? Which is, if it's massive, which generally people know who know how to make money, that's what they do, isn't it? They're like a river, they just make money. But they may not have skills like the skills that you're offering, which is actually, well, let's just make sure we keep the money and not just keep going in a cycle of losing the money, gaining the money, losing the money, like it's just a little clip on of security, isn't it, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, it's the American proverb, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeve in 3 generations, and how do you stop it, right? And I think, with family offices, they are getting more sophisticated, right? There was a time where the trusted advisor, the consigliere, use the Italian term, that had its time, right? But the complexity in the world now has driven this sophistication. So these families that we're talking about are generally cross-border, they're global, as are their assets, right? So and also we're in this era of compliance and regulation where you got to make sure that your affairs are structured properly. So that's all that complexity means it's sort of an uptick and a sort of step up in sophistication and governance. And that's where, again, family offices come in, and they are getting more sophisticated. But firms like ours and family offices aren't mutually exclusive, right? Even this morning, that call I mentioned, the structure, there's trust and holding companies, et cetera. But members of the family office are on various committees within the structure, right? So there's an evolving ecosystem on how that all works, because it's one thing in theory, but it's another thing in practice as to how you can have a family office, have it run well, but get the other long-term protection, preservation, perhaps tax benefits, things like that. So it's that balance that's evolving fast, and it's exciting to see, to be honest, because we get to see it firsthand.
And I think in a way it's actually a good time to launch something, because it's that sense, isn't it, that entrepreneurs are running forward with innovation, but actually right now you have to be a bit more focused, don't you, on just making sure you've got the basics in place, even if it's security of your children or where are they going or whatever it is, even security of your assets, isn't it, like housing. And we did a call with Shillings, who are very much into, like, if you've got loads of office properties and you didn't actually visit the country for a while, you just actually need some security guards to just go and do a little check-in, don't you? And just things that are complete pain in the arse. And if you've got money and stuff, you don't want to be like, oh, did the nanny go and check up on the property? You actually need a proper service now. We don't need to go, right, we need to give you a report, the assets are all okay, everything's being monitored, even for the trustee. Which is one final thing before we move on to, you can give a bit more of an explanation of your services and then post-COVID. But litigation, do you get any sense of that? Obviously the litigation we're thinking about could be on investment returns. There's obviously whole-scale problems with trustees. Maybe people switch from one trust to another trust. Is there a sense that litigation is on the rise, or you've not seen that yet?
Well, as a trustee, we obviously hope not, but you prepare for it nonetheless. And, contentious matters is never something, pleasurable, obviously, unless you're getting perhaps fees for sorting it out from a legal side. But I think the short answer is not yet. There is this sense of worry amongst some families in terms of disputes around investments, perhaps with other parties where there's joint ventures or similar things like that. There's some worry about the family within the family disputes because people have been sort of stuck together for a long time. There's a worry around, well, have trustees done the right thing during this process? Have we, carried out our obligations as we should? So I think there is that concern, but in a way, it's not a bad thing, in that it kind of raises your attentiveness, right? Your sort of your antennas to be even that much more particular around investment reviews or whatever the process that you're undertaking as a routine thing. So not yet, but we'll see.
So give us your 5-minute pitch on your new service, and then just give me a quick post-COVID. What do you see? And then we can sign off and say, have a good day.
So as I said before, this family office launched yesterday. It was putting together various services around the world in our different segments, so not just in private wealth, but also in our institutional and corporate segments. We've put these all together to make it easier for family office to understand what it is that we can do for them, okay? And that ranges from all types of asset administration, from the alternatives to the traditional cash and public securities, but also luxury assets, yachts, aircraft, and artwork in some cases as well. And also, for example, we have expertise on luxury and very expensive automobiles and what to do with that. So it's these little niche expertises that we're having putting together. I'll just give you a few more examples. There's a wheel that you can see on our website which summarizes all this stuff, but I'll give you just a few more highlights. The other one is risk management. We haven't touched on that yet. That's another governance sort of endeavor that many family offices are starting to take. So for example, having a KRI, having a key risk indicator dashboard for the family office. And then it's a determination of what those risks are, how do we measure them, things like that. Well, we do that for funds, right? So our AFM capability, for example, just to pick Luxembourg, for example, we already do that. And we also already do it for some families. And now we're doing it on a much more. Sorry?
So what might that look like? I mean, you're talking about a cycle which I haven't looked at, but like where would it go into the red, I suppose, which is the risk indicator? What's an example?
Well, it depends on what the family's looking at in terms of what keeps them up at night, both from an investment side and a non-investment side. So if you pick the investment side, it may be exposure to certain types of assets, right? Or certain regions in the world. And then you see the needle going a little bit too far towards Asia or whatever it is. Or liquidity is a big one, obviously, in terms of current times around COVID.
Do you mean like a call for capital, which is causing like a lack of liquidity? Yeah.
Well, we haven't seen that in a sort of big way yet, just to be clear. But measuring whatever it is they want to measure in terms of making sure that they've got a dashboard, and we've also got an online digital platform that shows this stuff as well. So there's that. There's obviously the trusts and foundations and holding companies and private funds that we've run for decades. That's obviously part of the wheel. The one I'd point out there that's increasing in use is private funds. So you mentioned co-investment. So a lot of jurisdictions have introduced legislation for this particular market, including places like Luxembourg, Jersey, Singapore, where small amounts of sophisticated investors can pool together either in a highly regulated or in a lightly regulated environment, provided they're professional investors. So those private funds are also increasing in popularity. They're usually limited partnerships, but in form. Then if I move on the wheel, we've also got things like executive incentivization, things like carried interest plans on the fund side for executives, or share plans and pension schemes. And I've also mentioned our luxury services. The other interesting one I'd say is we have something called Cross Deal, which is a deal introductory service. It's digitized, so it's on a platform. And it basically introduced sellers and buyers of private assets, so real estate and private equity mainly. And and that, that a sense, that's the holistic view. And I'd say if anybody's interested, and I hope they are, of course, just have a look at the website. Yeah.
So give us we'll move on to COVID and then finish off, but give us something on philanthropy, because I think there's obviously a bit of a reputational issue now with being wealthy and just going, oh, well, I'm just fine because I've got millions of horses and art and stuff like that. So philanthropy is clearly a big issue, isn't it, with many families having hundreds of years of involvement. So I mean, how does that manifest in your business in terms of steering people?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because just yesterday I had a call with a client on this, where they've established a large philanthropic structure to inform a purpose trust for a certain purpose that's important to the family. And one of the things they noted, and I've seen this in the media as well, is a lot of your conventional charities, or public charities, it's tough for them. They're not getting the donations that they're used to. There isn't the marathon being run. There isn't the other events that drive a lot of this fundraising. And also the deployment of those funds into charitable causes is more difficult. So it's no different in sort of the more private space, where, of course, normally it's the families funding these vehicles. But the challenge they've had now is deploying it. People are at home. We're not able to actually get the resources to where we wanted to get it to. And what I'm referring to is around education for girls in Africa. And it was all going quite well in the last couple of years, and then this whole COVID disruption has really challenged us to actually deploy the capital. So our issue in that case is not getting funds, but it's actually deploying it, which is really unfortunate for those people that ultimately are intended to benefit from it.
Well, that's good that you're thinking about that. So post-COVID, give us a quick view, what you think about the world that will emerge. I mean, I think one thing that people have said, in sort of a theme that's emerging, is people being kind. And like, I think it's easy to be a bit flippant about that. But actually, I have realized that if people are kind to me, I do feel quite touched by it. So I do think it is a reality, isn't it? So is that the reality, that we think actually just being nice to someone just makes a massive difference to how they operate? Or what's your view on post-COVID?
Yeah, well, I guess when is post-COVID? That'll be an interesting one.
Very good point. Yeah.
things are starting to open up in many places, but there is that worry that it'll close up again, come winter time. So, fingers crossed we get a vaccine and people can get back to normal. But what's that going to look like? I think there will be, from a business point of view, I think a lot of our clients have obviously operating businesses, and I've talked to clients about this as well. And not just like ourselves in the finance and related industries, but there is a real closer look at working from home and the type of real estate that's needed. I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, though, into the market and prices and rental prices and things like that. I'm not sure, to be honest, because I've heard counter arguments sort of both ways as well. So that'll be an area certainly to watch. But I do think, and in a way hope, that the awakening that we talked about earlier, that preciousness of life, that feeling doesn't go away, that if people are going to set up their affairs properly, they get onto it, and don't lose that, hopefully they don't lose that sense of reviewing what they had currently, or getting something set up like a will or a trust, or whatever it might be. So that's a hope and perhaps a little bit of a projection as well. The other projection is again around the trends of the ultra high net worth and family offices and that ecosystem developing as well. And again, I'm writing a paper on that, so hopefully I'll get that out shortly.
Perfect. Well, let us know and we'll publish that for you on LinkedIn. But I want to say thank you so much. You've been a great guest for us to have today, and we really look forward to catching up with you in Jersey. We're not exactly sure how the flights are going to go for everyone yet, but have a great Tuesday. Thank you for your thoughts, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much, Karen, and stay safe and healthy as well.
Oh, thank you.